Take it away, Patrick.
All right, everybody see the slides?
Yes.
Good. So welcome. Thanks everybody for coming. We're looking forward to a good workshop today, talking about how to build a strategic plan for your research computing and data program. The first thing is to make sure that everybody can get at and see the participants folder. That was linked off of the Pathable space. You can also see the tiny URL there. And go ahead and sign in on that planning workshop participants doc. You'll see that in there just so that everybody can see who one another is. And then when you get into the breakout groups, you'll also introduce yourselves really briefly there. So to start with, I just want to have all the workshop facilitators introduce themselves. I'm Patrick Schmitz with Semper Cogito Consulting. We'll go in the order on the screen there.
Hi, I'm Dana Brunson at Internet 2.
Hi, Doug Genowine, Arizona State University.
Yeah. Hi, everybody. Good morning. I'm Claire Mizumoto from University of California, San Diego.
Good morning, everyone. Scotty Strachan from the University of Nevada, Reno.
And I'm John Hicks from Internet 2, just helping out.
Gwen said she'd volunteer to help out too if we have.
Oh, yes, I will. Thank you. I'm Gwen Jacobs. I'm Director of Cyber Infrastructure for the University of Hawaii System. Happy to be here.
Yeah, we're gonna wait and see if we actually have a full house, how many breakout groups we have. So we've got a couple of extra or on deck facilitators. A copy of the agenda is in the folder. I'm just gonna go through it really briefly here. We've got a really full schedule with one short break. There's going to be a lot of time for discussion and sharing. It's not all going to be just talking at you. Make sure you do spend some time to get to know the folks in your breakouts. So we're going to have a short presentation on strategic planning, an invited panel presentation set, and then a couple of breakout groups that are going to discuss topics around this and explore some of the themes. Each of those will report back, and then we'll discuss as a group what we're seeing there, and then we'll wind things up. So for the workshop, what we really hope is that you're going to see some new tools or approaches to strategic planning, or at least get some ideas from some of these different things. We're also hoping you're going to build some connections in the community to share ideas in the future. A lot of what PEARC and CARC are about is gathering people together and making those connections so that you can learn from your peers and share. And then as well, we'd like to have an outcome of this where we're actually identifying, and you can help us identify what would help the broad community in terms of resources available for getting into strategic planning, because this is something we'd like to be able to share with the community. And so we're looking for input on that. So I want to do just a little bit of background on some of the tools that I've seen and used for strategic planning over the years. These are general principles and tools in wide use. There's no rocket science here. I've used them across startups and big companies, as well as when I was at Berkeley for 12 years, especially for research computing and data planning. These are just tools and frameworks, right? They're not prescriptions. These are not going to build your strategic plan for you, nor are they going to tell you exactly what you're supposed to do. Find the things that make sense for you, adapt them for your local culture. At the same time, think about what you might not be doing now and consider integrating some new things into your process. So to start with, some things that you want to make sure you've got to before you get into this is an assessment, right? It's really hard to plan if you don't know where you are. And obviously the capabilities model is a tool that many people are using for this, but there's some other things as well that you want to complement that with. And we're going to talk about some of those today. One of the most important things is to think about the relevance and alignment to your campus. Okay, so there's a tendency to plan for what you know is best, but you really need to make sure that you're aligned with campus leadership. The folks that are going to be making some of the decisions about whether you have access to resources, you have the kinds of collaborations you need, they want to know that you're supporting their goals as well. Okay. And it may be that your campus strategic plan or goals are tacit. They don't have a formal plan out there, but you still want to assess where they are and what are the things that they think are important, okay? So the next thing is to think about really what's driving your priorities, right? Is it researchers who are saying, we need this, we need more of this, we need these new things, or we need this kind of support and training? Is it your senior leadership who's saying, we need you to go in this direction, or we want to see these kinds of outcomes? Maybe you've got trustees that really want you to be in a top 100 cluster, or you may have a team clamoring for more people and resources. All of those are reasonable, and they're perfectly valid things to be drivers, but you want to make sure you understand who's driving them and what their pain points are. Really, what are you trying to do? Then for each of them, what are their top issues and pain points? There's always a laundry list of things that people will ask about, but you really want to know what are the things that are really driving what they want out of your program. Then what are your key challenges in addressing those or in providing the services you want, right? Is it lack of money? Do you really need more funds to buy equipment or to hire people? Is it policy or politics? Sometimes you're trying to set up a partnership in order to do what you want to do, and you're running into barriers, either structural or political on campus. The partnerships themselves may be an issue in terms of building a strong tie, for example, to a library or to a school or to a lab that's also doing some training. Or is it with recruiting and retaining your staff? Okay, so understanding what those are and what are the most important issues there. You really want to assess that. Then it's really useful to map an influence network. This is something that I think a lot of people don't spend enough time on, and it can be a very powerful thing. You really want to understand who is it that can break the roadblocks for you? Who is it that can make things happen so that you can get those resources you need? And who is it that you're then influencing to make progress, okay? And then what do they care about most? Not in your program, but what are their key motivators? Is it for your senior leadership? Is it faculty recruitment and retention? That's often a really big one. Is it being able to make a big statement in a particular area? Okay, so map that and think about what are the things that are moving them. Then how are you going to make them care about your issues? How are you going to connect what it is that you're facing to what it is that they really care about? Then it's often the case that you may not directly be able to push them in the direction you want. And this is where mapping the influence network is useful. Who has influence over them? Who is an advocate that can make the case for you to the people who are in a position of influence or a position of decision making? The ideal you're working for is that those with real influence believe that their success depends upon your success, right? That's the way you want to think about mapping and leveraging an influence network. You've got to convince them that your story is essential to their story, all right? And a lot of what strategic planning is about in the end is building an effective story. Now, it is important to think about the scope of what you're trying to do. I come from a background where I spent 25 years in startups, so I have a very entrepreneurial bent, and I really believe in setting high goals and inspiring people to push for those. At the same time, if your goals are set so high that people think we're never going to achieve that, people can get really frustrated and they'll just disconnect and say, we're never going to get that. So why should I even work on this? I'm just going to fail. And setting the balance of those is not just a challenge in itself, but it's also a function of how you like to lead, all right? Do you prefer to be more entrepreneurial, or do you really prefer to optimize a production service? And both of those are valid, and they're a function as well of your local cultural context, but you want to think about where you're setting the balance there. I do believe it's really important to be ambitious, to do a little more than you think you can, but not so much that you're going to burn everybody out or just make them disconnect, okay? So with that, I want to move to one of the main tools that's used in strategic planning. Some of you may have heard of this, the OGST model, which characterizes objectives, goals, strategy, and tactics, okay? It's pretty common in use. It's variously interpreted in different areas. The thing that I want to focus on here is the ideas, not the strict definitions, but just think about this as a means of approaching what you're doing. So the first aspect of it is objective. This is the overarching mission, and this is probably going to be tied to your university mission or maybe a college mission or your lab mission, depending upon your context. So some examples that I could imagine here, you're providing RCD services that advance the campus research mission. Very high level. This might be more specific if you've actually got some university objectives, right? If they're saying we're going to push into life sciences or something like that, then you're going to talk about how you advance that. Another classic one is to improve faculty and graduate student recruitment and retention, all right? That's a clear thing that connects to the university mission. Goals then are the stepping stones to achieving these objectives. They're less abstract, but they're still pretty high level and they're focused on that mission. In particular, they should be SMART goals, which many of you I expect will have heard about. This is specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time bound. So for example, relating to the things I was just mentioning, let's say you're going to launch a secure computing enclave capable of handling CUI within 18 months. All right, so it's very specific. You can assess whether you did that. It's obviously relevant, assuming what I just said earlier about the objectives, and it's time bound. Okay, now, is it achievable? That depends. This is where you have to assess what you've actually got available. Similar ones would be opening a new GPU and TPU pool in your cluster this year, or increasing your consulting capacity by 50% across all campus domains this year. Those are bold statements, but they advance whatever it is you're trying to do. Strategies then are the approaches, priorities, or choices you're going to have to make in order to achieve your goals. This is where you're getting down to, okay, how are we going to go about this? Partnering with the Office of the CISO and the Dean of Health Sciences to put that CUI enclave together, for example. If you need to add new pools, you may have to find new funding streams. You might not have it in your budget to do that. And then you've got to think about, all right, how are we going to go about this? Are we going to partner with PIs? Are we going to be looking for grants? Are we going to be looking for industry partnerships? But the strategy says, okay, we have to go after new funding streams for hardware. That's how we're going to approach that expansion. And then on the consulting side, you may say, okay, the strategy is to expand graduate student internships and partnerships with divisions. But again, these are specific approaches to achieve those goals. The last one then is the tactics. And these are establishing this individual steps towards the strategies, okay? And this is something that will then become things that your team can take on and run with. So you might build a CUI working group with the key partners as a means of actually moving towards that. Develop a grant review activity for the leadership team. Or if you're trying to build on those graduate student consultants, you're presenting opportunities for your internships at graduate student orientations, okay? So that model on one screen here, and I know I'm blowing through this, all the slides are available to you in that participants folder. Most of this stuff is also documented out there. I'm just encouraging you to think about a more structured model like this when you're approaching strategic planning. I put the source link in here, even though at 404 is for me now. I don't know how to better credit this image. It's one that I actually like for a one-pager of this. But you know, it relates all of these together, and it's a way that you can talk to your team about how to make sure that you're thinking at the high level all the way down to the low level, and not just focusing on a purchase list of hardware, for example. An alternative to this, or a variant on this, OGSM, is objectives, goals, strategies, and metrics. And this is where, rather than tactics, they really want to say, let's make sure we're measuring all the time and we're characterizing our progress. It works well when you have measurable outcomes, not surprisingly. And I've seen this a lot in marketing plans and sales plans and things like that, where they're looking for dollars or customers or social media hits or things like that. I don't find it as useful in our domain, but you'll see this a lot out there when you go looking. Some other tools to think about then are SWAT, which is one many of you will have heard about. Strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. You just build a quadrant of this. You characterize each of these related to your program. There's tons of material out here to talk about how to do this. A lot of people may dismiss this as strategery that they do in central IT. It's actually fairly useful as a means of assessing what are some things we should be thinking about. And I actually like doing it, even if it's just a team exercise. And start, stop, continue is another one that I really like. Within your team, especially if you've got a series of services and you're being asked to do more with less, which is probably familiar to some of you. This is a really useful thing to go through and say, okay, well, what are the things that are really important that we continue to do? What are the things we can consider stopping to free up resources so that then we can start some new things? Again, it's not going to answer all your questions, but it's a really useful input to assess where you are and to get your staff to help tell you what they think. You might actually pull in some faculty advisors on this as well. And then the last one that I really enjoy using is the skills matrix. And here's one where you just set up a graph. You have one axis that is the strength or depth of coverage of a skill on your team. And then the other axis is the importance to the campus or your program. And you might look ahead on this a little bit, anticipate the next 3 years. Are you going to have to develop more GPU expertise or possibly FPGA expertise, as an example? Do you need to get a lot more depth in some kind of optimization, or do you need to develop skills or coverage in new domains? Right. And when you're doing this, you might consider your team and the network of partners, whether it's libraries or labs or others that you also work with to support training and different kinds of services. I like this because it lets you take a look at opportunities for professional development. And if you do have the opportunity to do any hiring or you're going after consultants, like graduate students, it gives you a sense of some of the things you might want to look for to balance out on your team. So some of the things that I would remind everybody, again, this will be obvious to many of you, but it's still worth stating, is that strategic planning just gives you a start, right? It provides a map. It's the initial plan against which you're going to execute. The execution and the change management will determine whether you, and to what extent you reach those goals, all right? So the plan is not going to solve the problem. It's really how well you execute against it. Regular, honest progress assessment is essential. At least quarterly, you've got to take a look at that and be honest and say, how are we doing? And do we need to adjust? All right? Things will change. And so your plan is going to have to as well. So campus may shift objectives on you. Pandemics happen. Goals have to be tied to however those objectives shift. And so you may get new goals along the way or drop some. Strategies honestly sometimes work and sometimes don't. You know, you may have set up this idea of going after extra funding and you just hit a wall. And so then you have to think about, all right, well, what's a new way we can think about that? And you have to come up with alternative strategies over time. And then obviously tactics evolve with experience. You try stuff works or it doesn't, okay? So I know this is a lot, this is sort of a fire hose. I didn't intend this to be a training session so much as a source of inspiration. I want to provide some food for thought and discussion as you listen to the panelists and then as you work in your breakout groups. So obviously, if you want to pursue any of these things, you can go find materials, or, you know, happy to follow up with us and you can learn more about it. But the main thing is to think about, okay, what might we want to consider, and then pursue that discussion. So the next thing now, I want to transition to Claire, who is going to introduce our panelists for today. And Claire, do you want me to just leave this slide up, or how should we manage this?
Let's leave the slide up for just a minute while they introduce themselves, and then we can take it down so you can actually see, maybe see their face in a little bit bigger window.
Okay.
So hello again, everyone. We're happy to have Dr. Gwen Jacobs, Dr. Scotty Strachan, and Doug Genowine as our panelists today. We'll get into their experiences in just a minute, but first, I'd like to have each of them introduce themselves. We've had a few more people join. So if they could introduce themselves with their institution and area of responsibility. Gwen, would you like to start?
You need to unmute,
You're
Gwen.
muted.
Okay, there I go. I'll try again. Good morning, everybody. I'm Gwen Jacobs. I'm the Director of Cyber Infrastructure for the University of Hawaii System. My group provides research infrastructure for our 10 campus system. We have one R1 institution, 3 R2 institutions, and the rest are community colleges. I also wear 2 other hats, which also helps with all the strategic planning and finding of resources. And that is I'm co-director of the Hawaii Data Science Institute with my colleague Jason Lee, and also the director of Hawaii EPSCoR, which provides another opportunity to be able to support cyber infrastructure. So I'll stop there and listen to my colleagues.
Scotty?
Sure. Good morning. Thanks, Claire, and the rest of the team here. Scotty Strachan here from the University of Nevada, Reno, where I am the Director of Cyber Infrastructure, housed in the Office of Information Technology. This is the enterprise IT organization. So that'll be an interesting discussion point as we move forward. I actually have a background in mountain climate science. I still do, in theory, 20% research. And so I'm embedded with the research faculty and I'm able to communicate with them about their needs and what they would like to see next. So that should do it for now. Claire, back to you.
Thanks, Scotty. Doug?
Thank you, Claire. Good morning. I'm Doug Genowine, Senior Director in the Research Technology Office at Arizona State University. We fall under the Vice President for Research branch of Executive Leadership at ASU. I've been with the university about 2 years. Before that, I was at the University of South Dakota about 21 years, where I was Director of Research Computing.
Thanks to each of you. So now we'd like to give each of them the floor to chat for just a few minutes.